Well, hey there, it's that coding guy here, breaking it down and making it accessible. In this episode, we are diving back into the Dungeon Keeper demo. We're delving back in, and we're going to tackle the data layer today, which is the next layer in our layered architecture. I'm going to kick off by creating a new branch. We'll create the data branch to do our work on here today. And when I'm done with this video, I'll push that up to that branch and you'll be able to check it out, pull it down, and noodle around on it. So where we're at so far is we've got the room controller that defines a mapping endpoint for getting all rooms. And when we get a request at this endpoint, we call the service layer and say, hey, run that get all rooms method you got over there. And if we go look at the room service impl, then we have this get all rooms method. The return type is a list of rooms. And what we do, I just hard coded some stuff here where I create a new room object, I create a new array list, I add that room to the list and just return a list. This was just to prove that we could get from the controller to the service layer and return some stuff from the service layer all the way back through the stack to the controller and back to the calling client, which was Postman. Moving forward, though, we don't, this is not necessarily going to be helpful for us. We want to get all the rooms out of the database. So let's remove this code. And what we're going to need to do is rely on the repository. So because the repository is going to be a dependency of the room service impl, we're going to go ahead and declare that. So we're going to do room repository. And if we take a look at the room repository itself, it is an interface. It's annotated with @repository. And it extends the CRUD repository. And if you don't know what that means, that's okay. At the crux of it, we're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants here. There's a bunch of code out there that has already been created for us, and we're just going to use that. By us telling it that we're dealing with our room entity, and by telling it what kind of ID it has, it's going to open up a bunch of basic CRUD, create, read, update, and delete functionality for us to use just by the fact that this interface exists and it extends CRUD repository and it's annotated as @repository. Now, in the future, I'll go ahead and do a video just on these annotations. I don't want to take too much time here to talk about those. But for now, just know that this annotation tells Spring, hey, this thing is a repository. It's going to do data layer stuff. And the same thing with the service. And I'll talk more about that in a future video. But for now, for us to actually use the repository, we need to get this guy injected into our service. And so we've got this room repository declared now. And I'm going to go ahead and add that to our constructor. And in this constructor, we'll say that this room repository is equal to the room repository that was passed in. And finally, we will slap auto-wired on this. We could put auto-wired up here on the field itself. This would be referred to as field auto-wiring, but the Spring documentation recommends that we do constructor auto-wiring. So we'll throw that there, and I will also do a future video on dependency injection and talk more about that. I don't want to take too much time away from this data layer video, but I will definitely dig into those two topics, the annotations and auto wiring and dependency injection, in a future video. So look out for those coming down. For now, just know that this is injecting a valid room repository into our service so that we can utilize it. And we said that the Room repository gets us a lot of stuff for free. Well, one of my favorite things to do is take an object and put a dot after it. And this will tell us all of the things, all of the methods that that thing has access to. So using this Room repository, it looks like we can do all kinds of things. We can find all, we can save, we can delete all or by ID, we can perform a count query, we can delete specific objects or by ID, we can find by ID. So a bunch of cool stuff that we can do. And that, again, is all because we're extending CRUD repository. And this is part of the benefit of using a framework like Spring, in that, you know, all that code is out there, and now we're just benefiting from it. And that really frees us up as developers to focus on application logic. You know, what is the logic that my service needs to do? And the framework is handling all of the minutia for us. So this is a get all method. So I'll use the find all method from our repository here. And we can simply return that. Now this is giving me an exception or an error here, a compiler warning. It's saying, hey, the required type, you know, the thing that you defined this method to return is a list of room, but what repository find all actually returns is an iterable of room. So what we can do here to solve this is, well, if this thing is returning an iterable, well, we can just make our method return an iterable here. And we'll have to fix that in the service, which is our interface. So if we make this an iterable of room, and then once again in the controller, we also had this set up to return a list of room. So if we just make that return an iterable of room instead, now we're hunky-dory throughout all our layers. So now that we have done that, what we can do is do a little bit of Java docking. It's part of our professionalism as software developers. We want to make sure that we're doing things in the best practice way. And one of those best practices is documentation. So there's a quick little alias that you can do here just by doing a /** and hit enter. This creates a little multi-line comment for us so that we can document our code. And it's best practice to document all of the methods that you write, especially the public ones. And what the key here is to shoot for defining what this method does, but not how it gets it done. So at the end of the day, what this does is contacts the repository to get all the rooms from the database. And it returns an iterable of rooms. So that is a clue to other developers, and that other developer may be us in 3 months when we're diving through the code base and we see a method and we're like, what does that thing do? It's been a while. We might write code and then 2 weeks later be like, oh man, I don't even remember what I did. So this is a leg up for you and other developers around you, giving them clues. It's very important to do that kind of stuff. Well, let's fire it up. Let's see how we did. As a reminder, as part of the application, we have this command line runner bean running so that whenever the server starts, we automatically hard code, we save a new room into the database using a repository. So we should expect to see a abandoned barracks come back when we do our get all. So let's let's fire this up. We'll run that guy. And cool, looks like we're started. And if we do a get at 8080/rooms, we get our abandoned barracks back. Now, this to me is good. Obviously, we got a 200 OK and we got what we expected, but this is a find all. So I can't really fully test this to my satisfaction without having gotten more than one thing returned. So what I'm going to do real quick is just duplicate this line and maybe put our throne room back in here. So now, every time the server starts, it's going to insert 2 rooms before it starts taking requests. So I'll rerun the server there. As a reminder, for backend development, whenever you make a change, you're going to want to restart your server to test out those new changes. So we'll send that guy back. Now I'm getting abandoned barracks and the throne room back, and I'm more satisfied now that this thing is actually going to return more than one thing. And I think it's really important to prove that kind of stuff to yourself as you continue your development. We can get some of the ego going. Well, yeah, of course it works. I wrote it. Of course, it's fine. But we should do our due diligence and really test those different types of things. All right. So that's all working good. It's time to go ahead and commit. We did document our method here. One of the things I like to do is do a bit of a polish pass when I'm about to commit, before I make my commit. So that means I'm going to go through each of the files that I touched and make sure there's nothing outstanding in here that I could clean up or fix up. And one of the things that I notice here at the top of this file is this import. This is an unused import. I can tell because it's grayed out. And in general, things that are gray are not getting used inside your implementation. So anything gray is suspect and deserves a look, because it's best to remove anything that's not needed. It reduces clutter, especially over the long term on projects that are running for years. It really lends to a bit of sanity here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-Alt-O to remove the import from that file. And I'll create a video on polish passes too, because I think it's a great part of your professionalism when you take the extra time to do this kind of stuff. Other people will really appreciate that when they're looking over your code and they don't have to tell you to do this stuff. And there is an easier way to do what I'm doing right now, and I'll show you guys that in a future video. My strategy for these videos is to keep them as short as I can and compact and on target for the topic, so that you guys, if you want to know about the data layer, you're going to come to a video that talks all about the data layer, not a bunch of other stuff. So that looks pretty good now. I took care of those unused imports, and I'll just give these a quick code styling here. And I'm using Control-Alt-L to format the code real quick and make sure it looks all good. And we'll go ahead and we touched that file too. I do have a couple extra lines here that have been bugging me for 2 commits, so I'll take the time to nuke those, and we'll come into to Git and take care of it. So we'll do a Git add-a. I'm confident that those 4 files that I touched, I want to save all of those changes. That's why I'm confident in using a -A here. And we'll do a git commit -m added repository implementation in the service layer. And now that that's done, what's the last step? pushing explicitly to my branch. That's up there on GitHub now. And so we've got the main branch, which was the branch from the first video where we did the controller. We've got the service where we dug into making that service implementation, and we've got that data layer. So go in, check out this code at any of the stages of development there, and we've got lots more work to do on this. There's some stuff in here that is not necessarily best practice, but I didn't want to overload this video with too much of it. So we'll talk about some exception handling and things like that here, and some of those other things I talked about in future videos. Hopefully this helps, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.